People in Oldenburg. Arbeitslosen Selbsthilfe Oldenburg. She is involved in the residence initiative Alte Glashüttensiedlung, which advocates for the self-administration of apartments in the former workers' housing estate Glashüttensiedlung in Oldenburg. In her lecture, she will present key findings from her doctoral thesis.
Yes, hello, and thank you for having me here, and thank you for your patience being the last one, and it's late, and I suppose everybody's hungry and thirsty, so I'm sorry, but that's me. So, yeah. So in my contribution today, I would like to focus on materialistic aspects of anti-East European racism and talk about what I consider to be a central component of it, naming that people from the imaginated geographic space Eastern Europe are seen in the Western imagery as used to hard labor and at the same time as particularly undemanding and submissive. They seem to be particularly well suited to so-called dirty work, especially in agriculture or industry. They are disposable. And I think this is crucial to understand the racial capitalism at that time. I will start with a too long introduction again. And I want to frame my research first in a global scale of the Imperial Germany, who was the second largest labor immigration country in the world. And about 2/3 of these labor migrants came from former Polish territories, which were at that time under the control of the German Empire, the brown ones, the Habsburg Empire, the greenish ones, and the Russian Empire, the purple ones. Most of these migrants worked in agriculture or industry. Therefore, one can say that production, especially within Prussian agriculture, until First World War, but also during the Weimar Republics, relied on the Polish workforce. German agriculture, in fact, could not function without Central and East Europeans, especially Poles. And even in times of high unemployment in the Weimar Republic, the agriculture industry demanded the so-called Slavic workforce, as German was considered unsuitable for this kind of work. The assignment of cheap labor to Polish, Jewish, or in general Central and East European immigrants was seen as beneficial also for the so-called German national strength, the Deutsche Volkskraft. My research takes resistant practices of migrant, Central and East European workers within the Northwest German textile industry. Delmenhorst in particular, nobody knows Delmenhorst, but in fact, it is relevant. Okay, some of us know Delmenhorst, but only the locals. Yes, because the workers there were nearly to 70% Central and East European workers during Imperial Germany, and during Weimar Republic around about 50%. Furthermore, this textile industry in Northwest Germany became a powerful and important economic sector after the foundation of the German Empire. And to name an example, of course, Delmenhorst is one of the biggest, at that time, biggest wool processing companies in the world. The Norddeutsche Wollkämmerei und Kammgarnspinnerei, short Nordwolle, which was founded in 1884 in the town of Delmenhorst, which is situated close to Bremen. Yeah. And the company owned several factories in the German Empire, and had also enormous properties and 10,000 of sheep in Germany, Argentina, and Uruguay, among others. In the following, I will discuss migrant work and non-work struggles and relate them to state measures or reaction of industrialist actors. I will look at migrant struggles as a part of wider social struggles, which did not necessarily concern racism. Nevertheless, the fact that they experienced racism also influenced the struggles. Racism is expressed in lower wages, in bad working conditions, in bad housing and residential segregation, in bad access to health care, educational disadvantage, etc. So, strikes, indiscipline or work slowdowns, breach of contract, protests against bad housing, the refusal to live in workers' residence, and so on, can be seen as forms of resistance. I will now go on with the discourses about workers from Eastern Europe, and we already heard a lot about it. I will bring only unfortunately two short examples, and I want to start with a picture which is very well known in Delmenhorst and in the Noordwolle Museum, and also in the research about Northwest textile industry. This represents Galicians workers, mostly female, and their male recruiters. And this is all, in wall size. I already said that, yeah, Noordwolle Museum. And it is always associated with foreignness, the Fremdheit, and also tradition and backwardness. But also one of the biggest the often met associations is that they served as cheap, unwilling labor, in German billig und willig. Other images about workers during strikes or protests or work stoppages are rarely shown or drawn, and they are less prominent. Also, in contemporary portrayals of the free trade unions or social democracy, workers from Central and East Europe were hardly seen as potential comrades in arms, but mostly as, quotation, wage and strike breakers who were completely immune to their agitation. This position was controversial, of course, but it assumed a dominant role. We can see this in an article which was the organ of the German Textile Workers Association, der Textilarbeiter, where it reports that immigrant workers in wool combing mills would not organize themselves in the union due to their supposed backwardness and undemandingness. It also states that the majority of these workers are Poles, Galicians, Ruthenians, etc. They are brought in every year from the backward regions and do not yet find the conditions in the combing mills as harsh as they are in reality compared to those in their former place of work. Only after a longer period of time do they realize the unworthy conditions under which they have to work, and they then generally prefer to shake the dust off their slippers and leave the place or seek more rewarding employment. After all, as mentioned above, they are unskilled casual laborers. This makes it almost impossible for the organization to penetrate them. Therefore, in the future too, the main focus of agitation will have to be placed on the locals. I think many of us maybe can connect to these views also today about East European workers. Unfortunately, I will skip the wonderful quotation of Regina Rubin, which is really great, but no time. So I want to say that in that time there are, we imagine Central and East European workers located in a social-culturally backward Eastern Europe space that would produce submissive and undemanding subjects. The people in this area would only know obedience. They would not fight for better conditions. They would not recognize trade unions. In contrast, the Northwest German area appears progressive and enlightened. As workers here, they would be involved in trade unions, for example. Forms of resistance, such as breaking contracts, are problematized and culturalized as weakness. This view contradicts the history of strikes, for example, in the Northwestern textile industry. There, Central and East European workers initiated and participated in several strikes. The best-known ones are the strikes in 1897, which were organized across 3 factories in the towns of Delmenhorst and Bremen, even against the will of the textile trade union, by primarily migrant Central and East European workers of the above-mentioned Nordwolle, then the Hanseatic jute spinning mill in Delmenhorst and the jute spinning mill in Bremen. And they spoke at least Polish, Bohemian, and German, as you can also see in this quotation. The workers demanded higher wages and shorter working hours, but they also criticized, for example, the dependence of migrant workers on residents owned by the factory bosses. And some of the strikes were successful, not in the Nordwolle, unfortunately, and led to wage increases. Central and East European workers were also significantly involved in the nationwide Nordwolle company strike in 1927, which can be characterized as one of the biggest strikes in Weimar Republic. Who heard about this strike? There were 20,000 workers who participated in this strike. But apart from a brief mention by Karen Hagemann, this important strike has remained undiscussed in history. And beyond these well-known strikes, there have been several other smaller or bigger strikes in which Central and East European workers participated, but they are hardly discussed in academic research. An answer to these migrant struggles, and I will soon finish, was a police measure of the German Reich, the so-called Landesverweisung. The German states reserved the right of the Landesverweisung, which meant that non-German citizens could be expelled from a German federal state at any time without mentioning any cause. Neither was it necessary for the police to give any explanation, nor could the affected person apply to the courts in order to stop the deportation. It was enough for the police to mention that the person was a so-called troublesome foreigner, lästiger Ausländer in German. And I will also skip this quotation from Heinrich von Treitschke, but only to say that the Landesverweisung was a politically motivated measure, mainly implemented in order to get rid of poor or unemployed people and to weaken labor struggles. So it was mainly applied for workers. In the early 1920s, the expression became interchangeable with the one of the East European Jew, in German Ostjude, and was strongly connected to the symbolic of the pest, the insect. In turn, migrant workers also developed counter-strategies against this or were not deterred by it. They nevertheless took part in strikes, as I showed, with colleagues, also with the German citizens. And in this situation in Delmenhorst, it was a particular situation, because it was a three-state triangle. So the expulsion could only be enforced for the respective federal state, not for the whole German Reich. So when there was a strike, workers from Delmenhorst, you see these 3 circles, which belong to the Grand Duchy of Oldenburg, could go to the Free City of Bremen. And workers from the Free City of Bremen could go to Blumenthal, which also nobody knows except the Bremen people, who belonged to Prussia at that time. So it was a very efficient strategy, and the fact that it happened is documented by an agreement between the authorities in Bremen, Delmenhorst, and Blumenthal. This is a very thick volume, I can say. And these authorities informed each other about completed expulsions in order to prevent workers who had already been expelled from one state to settle in the other state. And you can see here reason for the expulsion. Maybe some people can read this. Lästige Ausländer, troublesome foreigner, is all of them. The citizenship here is Russia and Austria. There are sometimes also some people from Netherlands, to be fair, but most of them are Russia and Austria. And the status is worker. You see this? It's really typical for this. So this example shows that the participation of migrants, of Central and East European workers, was strongly linked to struggles against nation-state regulatory policies, and that anti-strikes measures use nation-state and racist exclusions. Social struggles are directly linked to migration and anti-racist struggles. And in this context, mobility and the flexibility to change the job, for example, can be interpreted as a strength. And not something like an emotional reaction, which is non-organized. So I can say that anti-East European racism is formed here in a specific historic political context, especially global racial capitalism, we have to name it, but also other things, and need to be understood as a specific form of social relation. And I will end with some Central European workers being part of the Reichsbanner Schwarz-Rot-Gold, only to show some other images of organization. Thank you.